we have covered good ground regarding the basic understanding of CEC-U with respect to the society that she inhabits and shares her ideas with. So, but there are other ideas, and after the politics, there would be ideas also in CEC-U about the relevance of feminism to literature and how she understands the text. And rightly, we have been told that she is not just a thinker; she is more than a thinker. She is a very sensuous person and a sensuous writer, and she is a poet. So, all these things would combine into a formidable feminist view of literature at the hands of CEC-U. And we want that Professor Bajaj throws further light on this aspect of her writing, that she is giving a dimension to literature and to its appeal in society. So please begin.
Thank you, Dr. Prakash. I was wondering if we could just also look at some of the basic points of the essay. I would like to talk about the essay from the point of view of some of the basic points of CEC-U and take those as the entry point. Now, the first point that I'd like to bring your attention to would be that this point of sexual opposition and sexual difference that she talks about. Now, she mentions how in society we have always created binaries, right? And in creating these binaries between men and women, the dark and the white, or the bright zones, so on and so forth, she says we don't realize that there is a biological category of the woman and there is a cultural category of the woman. So in that she says that while there is sexual difference between men and women, we are made to not look at this sexual difference as a kind of a heterogeneous sort of an experience. Rather, we look at it in terms of opposition. Because because the culture, the masculine culture, or this kind of writing, which is again, as she says, phallo-logocentric, creates opposition in language, in text, in experience, in living itself. So history has always pitched this kind of sexual difference that men and women have had as actually a kind of a sexual opposition. That there is a kind of opposition between man and woman. So the woman is defined by a sense of lack, and the man is defined by in possession of the male principle or the male organ, right? So there is this kind of opposition, she says, which creates this kind of hierarchy. So she obviously says that is one of the things that has so far that has been done, and that has worked against the interests of women. The other thing that she talks about as far as this kind of a metaphor is concerned, sexual opposition and sexual difference, she also talks about how male theorists, male critics have so far created and reinforced this kind of binary. She takes the example, for instance, of Nietzsche, and she says, in the essay, and I quote, that the whole deceptive problematic of the gift, the woman, where woman is obviously not that woman Nietzsche dreamed of, who gives only in order to take, right? So there is this problematic of the gift that, she's in a way, she gives in only in order to take. It's as if she's incomplete without taking the male in her body. So, again, talking about Nietzsche and suggesting that, there is an entire problematic of gifting as far as men and women's relationship is concerned. On the contrary, Elaine CEC-U seems to suggest that this gift could have been possible among women. She, in fact, when she uses the metaphor of the mother in the essay, she suggests that it is a very strong metaphor because it is through it that the woman actually gives another woman a chance to be a woman. So she says giving the woman to the other woman, that's the phrase that she uses. But what does it mean, giving the woman to the other woman, where a woman begets another woman and therefore gives her the woman, the self, or the gift of the self to this woman? In a way, she is talking about this kind of camaraderie or this kind of woman-to-woman relationship that she finds it can be a kind of a gift of the self. And, she says, giving myself to myself. So, in a way, she uses this idea of selfhood among women, but she realizes that when this principle is used with men, it automatically turns into a kind of an opposition, not a companionship. And in this opposition, it is the woman who is at the receiving end who takes and gives her body in order to receive. So and then she takes for example, the idea of Freud. Another, again, in the idea of contesting this male theorists or the psychology of these people, the analysis of the psychological principles, and she says that man has been handed that grotesque and scarcely enviable destiny, just imagine, of being reduced to a single idol and consumed, as Freud says in his followers note, by the fear of being a woman. So, end quote. The idea that man has this kind of a destiny which is scarcely enviable, she says, that is that they always fear being a woman. And she says that again, Lacan talks about this kind of a sanctuary that needs to be built around the phallus, and phallus which could be sheltered from castration's lack, and castration's lack is again described as the woman. So she says that that women understand that we are in no way obliged to, she says, deposit our lives in the banks of lack. So she's obviously taking a dig at these theorists when she says that we are not obliged to deposit in our lives their banks of lack, in the sense that we are not defined and we don't want to be defined by any sense of lack, rather fulfillment. And this is where she brings in the metaphor of the mother, where she says that the mother is understood or can be seen as this unifying positive force, this nourishing force, where she says there is always, and this is again the quote that I was referring to, she says there is always within her, that is the woman, there is always within her at least a little of that good mother's milk. She writes in white ink. End quote. Now, the idea of course, the mother is used in order to reinforce the idea of womanhood, that a woman for woman, where once she says that a woman gives the gift of the self to another woman, it is through this that they can actually begin to collectively forge a feminine experience and a kind of a feminine writing. So another basic point of this essay is about connecting language with text and body, right? So how language is a kind of an urge to come to language. She's urging women actually to come to language and to launch their own feminine experience through it. And the desire to write, again, she connects with this erotic desires that combine in her. So how the text and the body, they sort of become one, infusing life into one another, while there is the desire to write in the text, and there is the desire which could be erotic desire or desire of the body, which get connected, and they reinforce one another in Zixu's scheme of things. Now, for her, the woman actually also inscribes what she speaks by using the whole body and using her own self, and she says it is through this experience that she lays bare her own self. It is this experience that brings her closer to her own self and breaks the stereotypes of society, breaks the Western sort of masculine logic or assumptions, and breaks the snare of also silence. So you see, these are some of the points that are central to this essay, and she uses these different metaphors, whether it is of the mother or there's another in fact very interesting metaphor that she tries to get into, which is the metaphor of darkness, right? And again, the dark brings us closer to Medusa also, that Medusa is seen as this kind of a dark sphere where she belongs, and she the inexplorable. So she says that the dark is not dangerous or inexplorable, rather it is unexplored. In that sense, she said it has so far not been explored, and this is something that scares men. So when she goes on to writing, she actually mentions how the dark is something that women are always given as their territory, where their lives are not understood, and they don't understand themselves, their sexuality is tangled. So in a way she merges this dark mysterious side of the woman with this kind of imaginative fleet that a woman takes. So there is this, so sexuality also merges with imagination and expression. And she says that let the priests of the masculine priests, she says, let the priests tremble, we are going to show them our sects. So by sects she means the female sex, but also the text, that is the female text. So in a way she's trying to bring out women from this dark mysterious side of their lives, and suggesting that it is through the imaginary or through imagination, which she says is inexhaustible in women. She says it is through imagination that women can actually fly away or break these stereotypes, through imagination, through writing, painting, music, and these streams of consciousness that they might have. These can actually lead women to finding feet, or to realizing their true selves. So so the metaphor of the dark mysterious side is also something that she connects, where she connects female sexuality with the unconscious. She talks about how rich this female sexuality is, that it is homogeneous and it is not limited to any one particular body part. And this is something where she actually comes very close to Lou Sirigire also, who also talks about female sexuality as a kind of a heterogeneous entity. And so she says that there are some horrifying myths which get attached to the Medusa in our own cultures, and which gives the dark continent to the woman, and saying that that it is unexplorable, but rather it is unexplored. And this is what is the task of the new age woman, which is to enter this kind of the zone of repression. And there she actually realizes that the past has done a lot of harm to women's lives, that the past has repressed them to such an extent that they have not been able to come to terms with their own lives or to understand themselves. And therefore she says, and I'd like to quote here from the text itself. She says, I do not deny that the effects of the past are still with us, but I refuse to strengthen them by repeating them, to confer upon them in irremovability, the equivalent of destiny, to confuse the biological and the cultural. End quote. So in a way she understands that the biological woman is one thing, and who this biological woman is something that we do not know. It is only the cultural woman that has been given to us so far, where the masculine principle has stamped a sort of a destiny on this cultural woman. And she says, I refuse to strengthen those ideas. And here the legend of Medusa is also something that she is trying to break. She says, when she says, I refuse to strengthen the old logic or the old way of viewing things or perceiving things, then she says that therefore I also refuse to look at Medusa as how men have so far looked at her. And to break the shackles of that perception is something that is in itself a kind of a political act for Elaine Zixu here. And here again I would like to bring in this discussion the idea of the biological and the cultural woman. What do you think? Does it make sense to you, the biological and the cultural woman?
Definitely, because culture has been used as a weapon against women. You form a culture, and that culture is dominated by the males, and they impose their constructs on women. They tell them what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to react, whether their job is to strengthen, to give pleasure, and passively participate in the social processes. All this is the domain of culture, and culture is the villain so far as women's ideas are concerned in the modern context. And they have in fact to bring in their self as concrete bodies, as concrete thinking, as concrete senses, and where culture would be at the receiving end, not the guiding principle. So I entirely agree with this. It's a new idea that you define culture as different from sexuality, for instance, the body, the emphasis on the physical, and that culture becomes then a kind of a sham. So why should women, be victimized by a kind of culture that doesn't belong to them at all?
Right. And she says the way to do that, to transform society, which is the very fabric of society, she says women need to intervene at two very basic levels. So she says that by writing herself, the woman would actually reclaim her body. When she writes herself into the text, so far when she mentioned that, I too felt it, but I did not write. I did not paint it in words. I did not express it. And in not expressing, I actually, in a way, let things be as they were. So she says that when woman writes, it is through that her body also returns to herself, and by writing herself, the woman will then return to the body, she says, and which has been more than confiscated from her, which has been turned into this uncanny stranger on display. So it's as if the body is not something that belongs to the woman. It has become a kind of a stranger, this kind of uncanny stranger which is on display. So the body that is on display is not the woman's body, because it is meant for the male, it is meant for male perception or male fantasy, or is a product of the male experience, right, or the male desire. So it is not a woman's body that is projected on the screen, for instance, where women's body gets commodified, right? So she says it's a stranger, this kind of body. But in writing, she says, you open the lid of the unconscious. In writing, you open the sphere of the repressed, and when you open the sphere of the repressed in writing, it is through that you become aware of your bodily desires and your bodily presence. So in a way, the way for her to unify the woman with her body is through the act of writing.
Can I raise a question here?
Yeah.
Because after such a comprehensive presentation of her views, certain questions would emerge. There are certain things common between romanticism and what she says. Imagination, for instance, exploration, darkness, mysterious, things and all that. And earlier, it's there in the Elizabethan times where the body, Shakespeare's plays, for instance, talk about that. And there is no mention of morality in Shakespeare, and that's why he was supposed to be banned in the 18th century. 18th century is a very dry century from that point of view, because then there's no exploration, there's no mystery there. And then romantics, come forward, and they use all these terms in order to explain themselves, as if, they were talking about beauty, they were talking about a kind of lusciousness, they were talking about, lyricism, they were talking about mystery, all these things. Coleridge's words come to mind in the context. So
I wouldn't agree with it entirely, because in the sense, of course, she's using these words, this mystery, dark, etc. But she's only talking about this kind of a history of writing that has so far perceived the dark and the mysterious zones as those belonging to women, and have made women also believe that the dark, mysterious belongs to them. Right. So in a way, she's actually trying to break this kind of a register or this lexicon of dark and mysterious as something that belongs to women. And because it has been a product of male writing largely, so women have not had the say. And so she says that it is, when she says that write and write yourself, then she is also, it is political for another reason, that she's saying enter history. Because so far you have remained outside history because you never wrote anything. And in writing, you have registered and documented something. And in documenting, you have created history, which was not possible till the other day. So she says that enter history, and so in order to change it.
In the light of this, what would you say about Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre? They are women's writing, they talk about mystery, and they also try to, I think history is a very good point you are making, they also try to enter history in the 19th century.
Right. Through writing.
Yes.
Through writing, for instance, when Jane Eyre creates the monstrous figure of Bertha Mason, when Charlotte Bronte creates the figure of Bertha Mason in Jane Eyre, then she has created a Medusa there. She has created a Medusa who laughs and who makes her voice heard. But she could only be repressed, or she had to commit suicide, right? She went mad and she could not be seen. So she is a monster for that society. She's seen as a monster by everybody else, and she's not allowed to live a normal life. And it is this that CEC-U is talking about, that the aggressive, assertive woman is looked at as monstrous, dangerous, and as something that scares the masculine society, and that keeps her in the dark mysterious zones. So it is time that this dark mysterious zone is revealed and comes to light, and does not seem and is not equated with darkness anymore, where light is generally equated with men or the masculine, white and shining. The woman is dark and mysterious. So she in fact wants to come out of that terminology of dark and mysterious and bring it out and reveal it. And she says the space to reveal it is in writing, because through it all the repressions of so many centuries will come out, one, and two, it is through writing that you are also creating history, which was so far kept out of it. You were kept out of it. So women have never written history. It is men's history that they read and they believe in. So by writing, and by writing their repressed and unconscious or repressed desires, women will also write history and enter history where and they've so far been out of it. So I think that's how I look at
that's a very correct thing to say. There is a difference between reading history, learning from it, and there is a difference in saying, that you make history.
Yeah.
That you enter history and,
but
you rework
it is only through writing that you can enter history. It is through documentation. So the fact that she says that I did not write it and I'm guilty of not writing when I had emotions overflowing me, when I had desires, that I did not write about them, that I did injustice to the whole cause of women's writing. So she says by writing, it is through writing that you will document that desire exists in women and that women have the right to define themselves. So writing as a historical act, as a political act of writing history around women. This is something that I think women become conscious of in the 1970s, that they cannot solely rely on men's principles and men's judgment of women's history. Right, and that women had to take part in this exercise of writing who they were, what they thought, and what desires they have, and not adhere to this sort of male desires that
and judgment
were
is a good
imposed
word.
on them.
Male judgment is a good word because they judge, whereas women have to assert, have to let them know that there is an alternative kind of paradigm.
Right. Also because it is based on the principle of opposition, what men are not. Or so it's always based on this kind of a sexual opposition of what men have and what they have not. What they have not automatically goes to the woman, right? And so if men are the bright white sort of a principle, then woman is the dark, right, mysterious woman. And so in the, or the dark continent as she calls it, and Medusa is that dark other side of a woman that men would not like to see, according to her. And so there is a kind of richness of female sexuality also that she talks about, and she says this female sexuality needs to be explored because it is largely an area that is unexplored till this point. And it is female sexuality is also very close to the unconscious for her because it has been repressed, and therefore I think she takes recourse to imagination and finds that it is through imagination that women can build that experience, go back to female sexuality and go back to the unconscious and build through imaginative works, artistic works, or as art itself is.
Can you explain a little more the role of imagination and the role of creative writing in the realization that women can have?
So she's not limiting herself to just creative writing. She refers to imagination and then moves in the domain of art and says that it is at one point she actually says that women express themselves through the body but through the song. So in a way there is a kind of a rhythm and a kind of force and a kind of flight of imagination that she talks about, which is possible in visual art, in creative writing, in music, in song. So these are all the ways in which imagination finds fulfillment and or women find realization.
What is the position of rationality in this particular scheme of things?
So, I think rationality of the alternate kind, not the masculine sort of rationality, reason.
Logocentric is not required.
And maybe there I would say that it connects with romanticism, as you said, because it tries to keep away the normative logocentric sort of rationality that so far logocentric, which is necessarily phallo-logocentric, right? So therefore, she's not in favor of that principle, which necessarily puts speaking makes a difference between speaking and writing, for instance. So it's more like a kind of a fusion, where the feeling and the emotion merges with writing and the text and the body, and there is a sense of fluidity. Now that could be seen as a very typically female experience, and a lot of women writers talk about fluidity. But I think it's not so much that they want to talk about fluidity, but it is also about finding a new sort of a register which could give space to women's experience, and not necessarily take the kind of a binary approach that men or masculine or patriarchy generally takes, or any kind of history of logic really takes.
Suppose I mention the word defiance to characterize this thinker. Would you agree?
Yes, I would say poetic and definitely irreverent and defiant. So, and passionate. She's really, you find her often repeating the word right. Right with yourself, right with your blood, right with your flesh. And she says fly, because flying is something that is very close to women, and women can fly. So in a way, she's very poetic in that sense, using a lot of these metaphors, but a lot of passion involved, almost coaxing women to come to expressing, to speaking. She says that silence has, this snare of silence has in fact restricted us, because we never spoke. And the moment we begin speaking, we will be able to break a lot of things and create a kind of a new path also.
Did she have some connection with Africa? In the sense, that there is the black and there is that kind of womanhood there?
She talks about Africa when she's talking about the dark continent, that woman is Africa. She's otherwise, so there is certainly exclusion, this kind of there. She's a Jew and a non-Algerian, a French Jew living there, like Derrida. And so there is a kind of an outsider's view which is there, which is necessarily, which probably brings her closer to the dark continent, or speaking from the point of view of an exclusion or a subject that has been excluded from mainstream. So a French Jew living in Algeria.
In half a minute, how do you conclude?
I would say that, CEC-U here is trying to kind of envision a new woman in the 1970s who would be unafraid of seeing herself in her true self, and that her true self is not necessarily going to be monstrous. She would find a beautiful self behind this facade of the masculine facade of monstrosity that otherwise the culture would have us believe. There is in fact one more thing that I would like to point out, is that how she connects the capitalist machinery with this entire enterprise, taking her cue from the protest movement. She says it is actually the imbecilic capitalist machinery that is also building a kind of a image of the woman, and is again restricting the way. So it's not just patriarchy, but also capitalism that she takes a dig at, and points out how in its nefarious ways it creates these managing editors and big bosses, etc., who do not want to see the female text. And this kind of a female text actually scares capitalism also. So I found that interesting, how she's able to build, bring together masculine capitalist culture.
Friends, we have had a lecture on CEC-U and her views, and this lecture defines, feminism from a different angle. And it has a lot of points to make and share with the audience, and I'm sure you would be thinking about these points in your own terms, and let the process go on. So I thank Professor Bajaj for this scintillating lecture, and I'm sure that you would have definitely enjoyed the lecture. Thank you.